You're listening to the VSL Aviation Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Lake. Welcome back. In today's episode, we're continuing the deep dive into the private pilot airman certification standards. And this time we're talking about Task D of Area of Operation 1, which is cross-country flight planning. Stay tuned. All right, cross-country flight planning, like all the other ones, starts with some references. So the FAA calls out Part 91, the AIM, Chart Supplement, the PHAC, the Airplane Flying Handbook, and the Risk Management Handbook. No surprises there. These references are pretty much the same for every single task. Next, it defines the objective, which is to determine the applicant exhibits satisfactory knowledge, risk management, and skills associated with cross-country flights and VFR flight planning. So pretty much the same verbiage, just added in the cross-country flights and VFR flight planning. So this is a way for me as the examiner to evaluate your skills at planning a VFR flight plan. And that's the key there, is a VFR cross-country flight plan. We're not using nav aids or anything to plan this, just VFR, so pilotage and dead reckoning. Next is the note. Now this is a new note to the 2024 ACS. So if you're studying the old ACS or you have a non-current version, this version has the note of preparation, presentation, and explanation of a computer-generated flight plan is an acceptable option. Right? Let's dive into that note a little bit more because it's pretty important. So you can prepare, present, and explain a computer-generated flight plan. So as the examiner, I don't have to see you do the longhand math or bring in a paper backup or show me how to do any of this on paper. As long as you can explain all the planning process on your EFB, then that meets the requirements of this task. So gone are the days of you having to show up with a paper backup and an EFB. Now, there's things that you need to do additionally. If you're going to use an EFB, there's ways to manage that risk, right? You don't want this iPad to be a single point of failure. So you need a backup, but if you have an iPad and a cell phone that also has ForeFlight on it, that's an acceptable backup. Okay, so with that note being addressed, let's get started with the rest of the topics. Now, with every task that we've talked about and all the ACSs, this is how they work. So just a real quick recap. I have to sample at least one knowledge topic, at least one risk management topic, and we have to do all of the skills. And that's how each of these tasks are broken down into knowledge topic, risk management, and skills. Now, the knowledge topics, those are also addressed on the written test that you take for the private pilot. So the Airman's Knowledge Test Report that you have after you take your written, let's say you missed 10 questions, all of those 10 questions will have codes, and those codes will be associated with a knowledge topic in most cases. So if you missed a knowledge topic that said Papa Alpha 1DK3A, I would know that you missed a question related to calculating time, climb, and descent rates, course, distance, heading, true airspeed, and ground speed. That's all that it tells me. It's not very specific. It just means that you missed a question about calculating courses or times or ground speeds, something like that. Now, during the check ride, I have to sample one knowledge topic, and that is one. So if you missed that one on your test, I have to review that one as well. So I have your knowledge test report. I have to look at all those error codes, and I'll go through and highlight them on my ACS, and then I will ask you that question during the check ride or ask you something about that related to our scenario that I give you. So just be prepared to answer questions related to all of those topics that you missed on the written. That's really critical. If you don't miss anything on Area of Operation 1 Task D in the knowledge test, then I can just select one of the knowledge criteria at random. And in this case, I have 6 knowledge topics to choose from, and there's 3 subcategories there. So there's about 9 different things that I could ask you on the knowledge topic, and I have to do at least one. I might wind up doing more than one, and as you'll see, just in the normal process of planning, we'll probably cover 5 or 6 of these pretty easily, but I don't have to ask each one. Okay, so I'm going to read through each of these knowledge topics and then just give my thoughts on them. So knowledge topic 1 is route planning, including consideration of different classes and special use airspace and selection of appropriate and available navigation communication systems and facilities. So this is essentially just your big picture route planning. How do you go in and choose a route? How do you know what airspace that route's going through? What decisions are you making to avoid certain airspaces? And I might intentionally choose a scenario that I send you a few days before the check ride that if you draw a straight line, it actually takes you through a restricted area, or it takes you through a really busy Class B corridor that it might be good risk management for you to avoid that, right? Those are all things that you might want to take into consideration, especially where the special use airspace is concerned. So anytime you really want to look at the scenario that the DPE gives you, because we're all trying to build scenarios that bring up discussion topics, right? We're not trying to be tricky. We just have we need to do scenario based evaluation according to the FAA, and we want to pick a route of flight that is going to naturally bring up some of these topics that we can discuss. And I want to see you arrive at the check ride having already mitigated some of those risks. And if you didn't mitigate those, that's not an automatic failure. That just means I'm going to have to talk and question about those and see what your knowledge level is. So we'll talk about that. I'm actually going to do a quick route planning exercise in ForeFlight here shortly. Okay, so that's topic one. And topic one has a subcategory A, which is use of an electronic flight bag, EFB, if used. So this is real important. It's telling me, hey, if you're using the EFB, I have to evaluate you on that use. If you're not using the EFB, I don't have to evaluate you using an EFB. EFB being basically ForeFlight. So if you arrive and you have all paper, then I can just evaluate you on what you bring. But if you arrive and you've got paper and an EFB, you're opening yourself up for me to ask all the questions that I want about the EFB. So be careful with that, because I've seen this a lot, because this is kind of a recent change. We've got an industry that likes paper planning, and so a lot of CFIs, they planned on paper, and so they want their students to plan on paper because they think, oh, that's what the DPE wants. But hey, to make it easier, plan on paper, but bring ForeFlight, because he might let you use ForeFlight. So students arrive and they know how to paper plan, but they don't know anything about their EFB. Well, this tells me that I can now evaluate your ability to use the EFB, and I know how to use ForeFlight really well. So when I start asking questions, I realize that, hey, you don't really know how to use ForeFlight that well, but you brought it to the check ride. That's an interesting decision. So be careful with that, right? If you're confident using ForeFlight and you've planned with it, then use it on the check ride. But if you're not confident on how to use it, either get some training before the check ride or don't bring it and plan on paper. But that is your choice as the applicant. Okay, next is knowledge topic 2. Altitude selection according for terrain and obstacles, glide distance of airplane, VFR cruising altitudes, and effective wind. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Can you select an appropriate altitude? Okay, if we're going eastbound, it needs to be the odd plus 500, westbound's even plus 500. But it's not just that. We have to clear terrain and obstacles and populated areas, and then we also need to leave ourselves room for gliding in case we lose an engine at cruise, right? If we're cruising at 2,500 feet and we lose an engine, well, we don't have a lot of options. We don't have much time to select a forced landing area. Whereas if we're cruising up at 7,500 feet, we're going to have a lot more time to choose where we're going to put the plane down in the event of an engine failure. All right, next is knowledge topic 3, and it's calculating. That's all it says. This knowledge topic 3 is calculating, and it's broken down into 3 different areas you have to calculate. So the first is calculating A. So this is K3A, time, climb, descent rates, course, distance, heading, true airspeed, and ground speed. K3B, calculating estimated time of arrival, including conversion to Universal Coordinated Time, UTC. And then K3C, calculating fuel requirements, including reserve. So those are pretty straightforward calculations. Again, I'm not going to have you manually calculate those. If you bring ForeFlight and you can show me how ForeFlight can calculate all those, hey, that's fine. I'm not going to have you break out the whiz wheel and show me on the whiz wheel. I'm not even sure I could figure that out anymore. I'm just kidding. I know how to use a whiz wheel, but man, ForeFlight is way easier than a whiz wheel. Okay, so K4, elements of a VFR flight plan. Hey, what are the elements of a VFR flight plan? We got to have our departure, destination, our time, our aircraft type, equipment, all that stuff. You need to know if that's built into ForeFlight totally fine. Or if you're built into your EFB, that's totally fine. If you're doing it on paper, bring a paper flight plan that you have filled out, because one of the skills that we're going to talk about later is filing said flight plan or simulate filing that flight plan. So you need to know the elements of it. Knowledge topic 5, procedures for filing, activating, and closing a VFR flight plan. So you have a few options here. In my mind, it's kind of 3 big ones. You can file it online through 1-800-WXBrief.com. You can file it on the phone via calling 1-800-WXBrief, or you can file it through your EFB like ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot. Both, I think all of the major EFBs have procedures for filing the flight plan through the EFB app itself, which is the one that I use the most, right? I file basically all my flight plans through ForeFlight. And then knowledge topic 6, in-flight intercept procedures. So should you find yourself flying in a tight formation with a fighter aircraft and you are not in a fighter aircraft either, then there's probably something that's gone wrong. So you've probably been intercepted. And what are those procedures? ForeFlight actually has a document section that has an intercept procedure document. I'll show you that here shortly. So that's a good resource. I may ask this during the check ride. Honestly, that's not one of the things I bring up in the scenario. If we're flying close to a TFR, so let's say I was giving check rides up in the DC area, you bet we'd be talking about special use airspace and we'd be talking about intercept procedures, because that's a really common occurrence. I wouldn't say it's more common in DC because they're just used to that kind of permanent TFR up there. It's probably most likely to happen at during an election cycle where we have a lot of VIP TFRs pop up around the country as the candidates travel around. So a TFR just pops up somewhere. You don't check the NOTAMs properly. You fly through it and you find yourself with an F-16 off your left-hand wing trying to get your attention. So that's not the best way to spend a Saturday morning. Wouldn't recommend it. But if you do get intercepted, what are the procedures and how do you find that? Okay, next we're going to move on to the risk management procedures. So we have 7 risk management items. The first 4 are just the PAVE acronym. So R1, R2, R3, and R4 are pilot, aircraft, environment, and external pressures, the PAVE acronym. Now, I expect you to be able to use that PAVE decision-making process to identify risks. So if you're using the ACE guide, and by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, the ACS that I'm using right now looks different than the FAA version. The FAA reformatted everything, and I don't love the format. So I reformatted it back to the old way where all the tasks fit on a single page. So if you're watching the YouTube channel, I've got a single page, a cross-country task D pulled up here, and there's some extra little links on here. These links take you to the source data of that topic. So in this case, the PAVE checklist, you can find out how to use that in the risk management handbook, which is part of the ACE guide. It's on page 3-4. So if you want to learn how the FAA wants you to use that PAVE guide for risk management, you go there. And it links you directly there. So I think that's pretty useful. But the PAVE guide basically is saying, I want you to identify risks so you can mitigate those risks, right? You can't manage risks that you don't know about. So if you don't check the weather, you can't manage the risks associated with that weather, right? If there's a convective SIGMET halfway along your route that might require you to deviate 50 miles to the south, and you don't check the weather and you don't know about that, then you're going to take off and you're going to run into potentially convective activity, which would be really bad, right? And best case, you do a late avoidance, but you haven't planned the fuel properly, so you wind up having to divert to an airport you weren't expecting to because you didn't carry enough fuel. So that might be an example of improper risk management. Proper risk management, me personally as an examiner, and hopefully all the other examiners are going to present to you a scenario that includes some PAVE risk management things that you're going to have to manage. And what I mean by that is most of my scenarios involve us, as the DPE, I'm saying, hey, I'm your close friend, and we're using pro-rata cost sharing, and we're flying to New Orleans to go to a conference. That's a common one that I give. So at this conference, I want to go to a social hour and maybe have a couple of adult beverages after the conference, but I want to get back to work the next day as soon as possible because I have all these all these connections that I made at the conference, I want to get back in the office so I can start my sales or whatever the business is, So I've created this external pressure, and what I'm looking for you or from you as an applicant is to manage that external pressure. So now you've got your passenger that has consumed some alcohol. Maybe you have the opportunity to consume some alcohol. Maybe you have the opportunity to stay up late. So how are you going to manage that risk on the front end? So you may say, well, Seth, it's fine that you go to the social hour. I'm going to call it a night at 9 p.m. I'm not going to drink anything. I'm going to wake up at 6 o'clock, do a standard weather briefing, head out to the airplane. If you can meet me back at the airport by 7:30 a.m., we can have you back in the office by 9 o'clock in the morning, no problem. Hey, that's some good risk management there, right? You thought about it on the front end. You had a plan for me as an examiner, so I can check the box on being able to handle external pressures. Now, during the check ride, I might make some decision points or throw you some curveballs to see how your tactical decision making is, because that's more of a strategic decision making, right? You got the scenario a week ago and you talked about it with your instructor, and y'all came up with this great plan. So hey, your strategic decision making is good. Let's see how your short term kind of tactical decision making is. So I'll do that by maybe changing up some of the scenario, like, hey, when we take off, we get airborne. We check in with center. Center says, hey, center weather advisory, there's moderate to extreme precip 50 miles to your north, extending for about 70 miles. What do you want to do? Oh, man. Okay, well, that just threw a curveball at us. How are we going to mitigate that risk? It might be, hey, we're going to turn around and land. It might be that the turnaround and land option is more of risk avoidance. It's not management. So risk management might be, okay, well, I'm going to go back to center and I'm going to say, well, looking at my ADSB, it looks like if I divert 30 miles to the west, I'll avoid that area of precip, and then I'll be able to rejoin my course and still get to my destination. I can do that because I planned extra fuel, so I can verify that I'm going to land with enough fuel still, even though I'm doing this, 30-mile version, but I'm going to mitigate the risk of that convective activity. So that would be excellent risk management, because it's not risk avoidance. You didn't just turn around and land, you managed the risk, which I think is a little bit more difficult to do than just avoiding the risk altogether. All right, next is risk management 5, limitation of air traffic control services. So I might present this by simulating a fire at the TRACON, which is the people that are giving you flight following. They kind of in a cool, calm, collected voice, as ATC is known to do. They say, attention all aircraft, we have indications of fire in the building. We'll be going to ATC 0, radar services terminated, and the line goes blank. Okay, we just lost our flight following. How is that going to affect our plan, right? What are we going to do? Also, limitations of air traffic control services might be related to altitude, right? You planned too low of an altitude that doesn't have radar contact. That's just one example of what might come up in a check ride. All right, R6 is fuel planning. So risk management when it comes to fuel planning. We already kind of discussed it with me giving you some example scenarios related to fuel and having to divert. But fuel planning continues to be something that general aviation pilots struggle with. It's pretty much our number one cause of engine failures is either fuel starvation and fuel exhaustion. And that's a failure to plan around fuel appropriately, either not having enough fuel on board or not verifying that you have that fuel, or not switching tanks appropriately. So fuel planning, there are a lot of different areas that could go into. There's a lot of fuel planning that goes into setting up your EFB that we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. It's really important to this risk management topic. And then R7, this is our last risk management section, is use of an electronic flight bag if used. So an EFB is great. I love it. I use it every time I fly. It's a required piece of equipment for me. Every time I fly, I've got to have my EFB. One, it's so easy to carry around. It has all of the information that I could ever need at my fingertips in the cockpit. It doesn't weigh a lot. I mean, there's a lot of positives there. But if I'm so reliant on this thing and I only have one, that becomes a pretty critical single point of failure. How am I going to manage that risk? So that's something that's going to come up in the check ride is how do you manage the risk of having a single iPad, such a critical item becomes a single point of failure? How do you manage that? Next is the skills. We have 5 skills, and remember, we have to do all of the skills. So for the knowledge and risk, we only had to do 1 and 1. We have to do all of these skills. So skill 1 is prepare, present, and explain a cross-country flight plan assigned by the evaluator, including a risk analysis based on real-time weather to the first fuel stop. Okay, pretty straightforward. You're going to use real-time weather, a real risk analysis based on that scenario that I give you as an examiner. You should get that scenario well prior to the day of the check ride, so you've got plenty of time to kind of analyze everything and get a good strategic plan for how you're going to approach this. Skill 2, apply pertinent information from the appropriate current aeronautical charts, chart supplements, notice to air missions, relative to airport, runway, taxiway closures, and other flight publications. Okay, that's pretty straightforward again, is you're going to use all the current charts and NOTAMs relative to the cross-country you're planning. Skill 3, create a navigation plan and simulate filing a VFR flight plan. Again, very straightforward. You need a nav log and you need a VFR flight plan. Next is skill 4, recalculate fuel reserve based on the scenario provided by the evaluator. So this might happen before or during the check ride, right? I might give you a scenario that has a little bit of variance in it. So I may say in the scenario, my friends might be coming along, or my friends want to come along and want to know how much bags, how much luggage they can bring. So what I'm expecting you to do is make a fuel plan and a weight and balance plan for just the two of us, and then maybe an extra passenger or two. So that may be a way that I approach that as examiner. It may be that during the check ride, I say, hey, we arrive at the airport, and unbeknownst to you, I brought along 2 friends. This is how much they weigh. They would like to come along. Is it possible? So then it's more of a tactical, okay, I got to go in and recalculate my weight and balance. If you're using ForeFlight, man, that's super easy. If you've done weight and balance on paper, that might take some time for you to go and hand calculate all of this. And I'll show you maybe some tricks on how you could, or some techniques, not tricks, but some techniques on how you could answer a question like that in a check ride environment. All right, recalculate, so that's skill 4. And skill 5 is use an electronic flight bag if applicable. So skill 5 is only required if you show up with an EFB. If you don't show up with the EFB, you're done at skill 4. So let's talk about the EFB, because that's really what this task D, revolves around. Is if you're using an EFB, you're going to use it in every phase of this task, right? And I'm literally going to be looking at you to show me on your EFB how you're calculating all of this. So I'm going to use ForeFlight because I think 99% of pilots out there are using ForeFlight now. Anyway, those that use EFBs, I would say high 90% are using ForeFlight. It's the superior product. I'm not a salesman for ForeFlight. I'm not sponsored by them. I just appreciate their work. I think it's a good product, and I like it. So that's it. So let's talk about how you would set this up for this specific task. So first of all, we're going to set up our aircraft. Right? Your aircraft setup is probably, I won't say most critical. These all are critical things for you to do. But setting up the aircraft appropriately, this is where I see the most errors of an applicant using ForeFlight is they don't have the aircraft set up appropriately. Okay, so I've got my screen shared here on ForeFlight, and we're going to go through what you would do here. So first, we've got the tail number. Okay, that's easy. Call sign, most of you aren't going to have a call sign, so leave that blank. You can load the serial number if you want, don't have to. And then we're going to choose the aircraft type. Now, depending on your level of subscription to ForeFlight, when you go to aircraft type, it's going to give you some different options. In this case, I've got the highest level of ForeFlight subscription, which you don't have to have. Like, I think it's military flight bag 1, but I do a lot of military flying, so there's features in here that you really don't need as a private pilot. But anyway, the Performance Plus gives you these ForeFlight performance profiles, and you can see this, and this is where it breaks down. If you're joining us on the podcast, you might, lose attention a little bit here, but go back and look on the YouTube video, you can actually see what I'm doing. But when you go to aircraft type and select it, ForeFlight will give you some options that have little blue links to performance profiles and some that are just the name of the aircraft, like the 172 with no performance profile. So since I have a performance profile, I'm going to select the performance profile available for the 172P, which is the specific make and model of the plane that I'm loading here. Okay, I've got that loaded up. Next is I can scroll down and change my performance profiles. I can change and or select them. Okay, let's be clear there. The performance profiles from ForeFlight include a climb, cruise, and descent. So for the 172P here, I have a full throttle climb. That's the only option. And then I have 5 cruise profiles. I've got a max RPM, a long-range cruise, a 2300 RPM, a 2400 RPM, and a 2500 RPM. So those are my 5 options. Looking at the max RPM lean mixture, I can't see the background data. I can't see the gallons per hour. I can't see the assumed ground speed. All I can see is 2 model biases, and I can slide those left or right. So I can insert a negative bias on the speed and a positive bias on the fuel, but I can't see the background data, which means I probably wouldn't recommend using one of these profiles only during a check ride. Maybe I phrased that incorrectly. If you decide to use one of these on your check ride, I would also, in addition to that profile, have a custom profile built and be able to explain to the examiner that, hey, my custom performance profile, I've entered those numbers in, but then I've also used the ForeFlight profile, and I've found that I can get the same results within like 1 gallon or so of planning and 2 or 3 minutes of planned time with the ForeFlight profile. So I've verified both, but for the purpose of the check ride, I might go ahead and recommend that you use the custom profile. So if you don't have one created, you can just tap the Add Basic Performance Profile button that's on this profile page. And I named mine check ride, and I loaded all 8 fields. So the 8 fields are my climb true airspeed, my climb fuel flow, and my climb flight per minute, feet per minute. So that's 80 knots, 10 gallons an hour, and 500 feet a minute. And this is a little bit of a spitball. I'm not pulling a Cessna 172 manual out. I'm just saying, hey, these are example numbers that are pretty close. And then the cruise, I've got the cruise true airspeed of 115 and a cruise fuel flow of 8 gallons an hour. And then for the descent, 115, 7 gallons an hour, and 500 feet a minute. So I've loaded all 8 of those profiles. A performance profile only requires that you fill out the cruise information. So you could get away with just filling out 115 knots, 8 gallons an hour. It's going to use that for climb, for descent, and cruise. Now that is a little lazy, but it may be good enough for your day-to-day flying. For the check ride, I would highly recommend not doing that. I would highly recommend that you have all 8 of these fields filled out for your aircraft. And not only filled out, but that you filled them out and verified that they are accurate. The way you do that is you top the tanks off. Say you're with your instructor, top the tanks off, plan across country somewhere on ForeFlight, fly that plan as close to the plan as possible. When you return to the field, top the tanks back off. You're evaluating 2 things. What was my estimated time that flight took, and what was my actual time? What's the difference there, right? Did ForeFlight get within a minute or 2 of my actual time en route on both legs? And then the next thing is, how much gas did I put back in? So since you started off topped, and when you got back, you topped it off, you know exactly how much fuel you burned. Compare that with what the plan said you were going to burn. If you're within 1 or 2 gallons, that's pretty good. If you can get it tighter than that, even better. But that's what you need to do when you go out and do your cross countries with your instructor, is try to get a really good estimate before you leave, and then evaluate that and see if it worked. See if the plan worked as planned. If it didn't, you need to fix your performance profile in ForeFlight, because this is not right. So we've got the performance profile set. Again, we used our custom profile. Now, if you have a higher level of ForeFlight, and man, the Performance Plus profile of ForeFlight, I know it costs extra money, but gosh, it's really awesome the amount of stuff you can do and how quickly you can do it, especially when it comes to weight and balance and fuel planning. I would consider getting that, but that's just me. I realize this stuff's expensive, so, you do you. But we scroll down, and we've got our weights in here. The weights are really important. Do I have the appropriate basic empty weight? That's going to change with every plane. And so when you add an airplane into ForeFlight and you just choose, hey, the 172P, it's just going to add, I don't know, a basic empty weight there. It's not going to be the one for that aircraft though necessarily. So you want to go to the signed weight and balance for the aircraft that you're flying and verify all this information. Make sure that the basic empty weight is accurate. Make sure that the max ramp weight, takeoff weight, and landing weight are the same for the model of aircraft that you're flying. There's some 172s out there that have a lower max takeoff and ramp weight than others. There's some 172s that have an STC that makes their ramp weight and takeoff weight higher. So you want to make sure that your weights in here are true to the aircraft that you are flying, not just generic numbers that came from when you selected it in ForeFlight. Next is our fuel policy. We want to spend a lot of time here, not that it takes a lot of time, but we want to make sure that all this is accurate. So first is our start, taxi, takeoff fuel. So this is the fuel that I'm going to burn from the time I start the engine to the time that I take off. ForeFlight automatically has 1.17 in here. We could do 1.5. That builds in a little slop, right? It reduces our accuracy. So I might start with 1.5. If I do 3 or 4 cross countries and I'm continually a half gallon off, maybe I go back to 1.1. But if you're maybe operating out of a busy class Bravo where you regularly spend 45 minutes on the ground waiting to take off, maybe I'd increase this to 2 gallons for start, taxi, takeoff. But for now, I've got 1.5. A total usable fuel, make sure it's accurate with your aircraft. For now, we've got 40 gallons set for total usable. In some 172s, you might see that you only have 38 gallons of usable fuel. So make sure the usable fuel is accurate. Reserve policy. This is interesting. This is kind of new to ForeFlight. I can set a reserve policy based on different standards, or I can do a manual. So I can do a manual reserve fuel policy, or I can do a manual in minutes. And so I'm going to choose to do manual in minutes and then make my default reserve 60 minutes. So that is my default reserve that I'm going to have. Next, I'm going to have all my filing information there. We're not going to spend a lot of time there. And the rest of this is more aligned with kind of international flight planning or instrument flight planning. Okay, so now that I've got my weight and my fuel policies set for the aircraft, I'm ready to start my planning. So first off, I like to start my planning on the maps page of ForeFlight. And this is just my technique. I like to start planning using the aeronautical layer, and I actually turn the sectional layer off. I'll turn the sectional layer back on as required, but when my initial phases of planning, I'll leave it off. I chose a couple airports up in Idaho, so we're going to go from Caldwell, Idaho, down to Gooding Municipal, which is in Gooding, Idaho. So those are my 2 points. And so right now I just have my aeronautical layer and I've got a direct straight line in between my 2 points. That's how I'm going to start this. And then I'm going to make sure that I have my aircraft selected, and I'm going to make sure that I have my check ride profile, which I have loaded, and I can hit the edit window to make sure all those numbers are accurate. So I've got that loaded. And next I'm going to plan my altitude. In this case, winds calm at 5,500. So I'll choose that, 5,500. So again, with the Performance Plus version, I can look at my profile and I can actually see that 5,500 is not going to work, at least in a straight line, because I'm going to impact terrain. Looks like in 56 nautical miles, I'm going to hit a mountain. So obviously that is less than ideal. That's not a good plan. So I need to either increase my altitude or I need to change my route of flight to avoid that mountain. I like how the Performance Plus profile gives you all this information in a really easy to digest, way. I can just look at this picture and say, oh yeah, this is where I need to change my route of flight. I can long press and see, okay, there's the red dot where I'm going to impact terrain, and sure enough, I look down here on the map and I can see that. So it looks like I'm going to need to pick some points to avoid that terrain there. So quick and dirty way to do that is I'm going to use the rubber band feature, and I'm going to rubber band my route over to this Mountain Home Airport. Airports tend to be good checkpoints because they're easy to see from the air. So that's a good pilotage point to use for my pilotage and dead reckoning. Because remember, we can't use nav aids on this planning session here. This has to be VFR with pilotage and dead reckoning only. We can use nav aids for kind of extra information if you want, but you can't use them as primary. You have to be able to navigate by, hey, looking outside and seeing the checkpoints. Okay, so now I've got my basic route of flight. I'll look at my profile now. Hey, this looks great. I've got, midway through, I'm clearing that I-train. Looks, I'm going to have 1,800 feet of clearance. So back to proper altitude selection. Is 1,800 feet enough? That's less than 2,000 feet. If you were to lose an engine, that's not a lot of time for you to pick out a place to land. It looks like just, hey, this is Idaho, and the field elevation looks like it might be fewer, great forced landing areas than normal. So maybe I want to change my altitude. Instead of 5,500, let's go to 7,500. And I can do that on the profile page there. Now I have midway through the flight at that high terrain point, I've got 3,200 feet of clearance. So I'm meeting back, what we were talking about before, that knowledge topic K2, altitude selection. I've got a good altitude selected now. Okay, I can also see in my profile view how I am just going to be cutting the corner of the Boise Class Charlie. I'm going to be flying into that Class Charlie airspace. Of course, right now, ForeFlight's assuming that I'm going to take off from Caldwell, and as soon as I take off, go directly on course. Well, that's probably not accurate, right? That's not what's actually going to happen. What's actually going to happen is, let's say the wind's favoring runway 30. So if we make Caldwell here full screen, we go to runway, we can see that runway 30 is right-hand traffic. So we're going to take off going to the northwest, but our flight plan is going to the southeast, so we're going the wrong way. We need to turn around. We need to add that to our plan because that's going to affect our timing and our fuel. So a real quick way to do that would be to use the measurement tool and measure out about 2 minutes. So I can roughly see where 2 minutes, so I'm going to fly upwind for 2 minutes. So then I can use that rubber band feature and drag it over there about 2 minutes on the upwind. Doesn't have to be precise, but pretty close. And then I can use the rubber band feature again to add a waypoint for my crosswind to downwind turn. And now I've got my upwind, crosswind, and downwind right-hand traffic departure out of Caldwell on course. This would be a really good way for you to do that planning. And you see how easy that was in ForeFlight? Super easy. And now when I go back to my profile view, because I'm spending the time climbing in the upwind, crosswind, and downwind, now I'm actually flying over the Class Charlie airspace. So as part of the scenario, the examiner might say, well, now that you're not flying through the Class Charlie, equipment do you need to legally fly over Class Charlie? Of course, the right answer is you have to have ADS-B to fly over Charlie. You don't need ADS-B to fly underneath Charlie, but you do have to have ADS-B to fly over it. So that might be a knowledge topic. And then he might say, well, what else would be a good idea to do while you're flying over that Class Charlie? And this is more of a risk management question. Of course, the risk management answer here is, well, sir, I'm going to have flight following, and I'll be talking to Boise Approach so they can vector me around any traffic that might be coming in or leaving the Boise Airport Class Charlie. Because even though I could fly over that without talking to anybody, from a risk management standpoint, it wouldn't be a great idea. So you can see how I've used the EFB to cover both knowledge and risk management topics out of Task D. And that's all kind of happened organically, right? We haven't just had to ask rote questions. They're all scenario-based. So I kind of like how that works. All right, so back to our ForeFlight plan. Now I need to pick a couple of checkpoints because looking down here at my skills, I have to see that prepare, present, and explain cross-country flight plan to the first fuel stop. That's skill 1. So in this case, our flight, we're probably not going to need a fuel stop. The total flight distance only 104 miles, and it's only 56 minutes, so we probably don't need a fuel stop. So in this case, we could brief all of it. So choosing our VFR checkpoints, again, ForeFlight makes it super easy. I can see I've got a VFR checkpoint right here. If I use the rubber band feature to slide it over, I can select that, the Kuna VFR checkpoint. And then my next checkpoint, I can just follow these railroad tracks that leave here out of Kuna until they make a little intersection here, and I can select that. So I've got Kuna VFR checkpoint, and then I have where the railroad tracks Y, and that's just north of this restricted airspace. And if I long press the restricted airspace, that's R3203 Delta, ForeFlight will highlight it in green. I can tap on details and see what frequency I need to be talking to see if that restricted airspace is hot or not, and I can see the upper and lower limit of that restricted airspace. So I can see that if I'm just a few miles south, let's see exactly how far off course I have to be. So if I'm just 2 miles south of course, I'm going to be in that restricted airspace. But as long as I can see the railroad track, I can just say, hey, the way I'm going to manage that risk is I'm going to stay north of that railroad. And as long as I'm north of that railroad, I won't enter that restricted airspace. So I just need to make sure I see that airspace. A way to back up my GPS, because your GPE might turn that off for you, is I can measure the distance from the Boise VOR and maybe give myself a little slop and say, hey, my limit is when I'm approaching that waypoint, I want to be no further than 13 DME off the Boise VOR. That would be a way to check that. And as long as you're 13-mile DME south of that Boise VOR, you're going to avoid that restricted airspace. Okay, so I've chosen a couple of VFR waypoints. I'm not going to go on the entire check ride here because just for the sake of time. But you can see my decision process in choosing this and how I might present it to the evaluator. So now when I'm finally done with all this, I'm going to tap the send to, and I'm going to send it to flights. So this is a really important section for you to have understanding on, is in the flights section. I want to be able to, I can set my departure time, my departure destination, my alternate airport. ForeFlight will also give me takeoff and landing data. If that's something that you only get the takeoff and landing data with Performance Plus. If you have a basic profile, you're not going to get that. So you're going to need to manually calculate it. But I'll just show you how this works real quick. If I tap on takeoff here for my takeoff, and I'm going to take off runway 30, I can do that, and then I can add a safety factor, which I'm going to add a 100% safety factor. So basically, I'm going to double the distance required, and I'm going to see that, hey, my total distance that I need is 2,560 feet for takeoff. That's really good information, right? I can go back here and take it to a safety factor of 1, and I can see that I've got 128 feet total distance, and it will give me my ground roll and my climb rate, all that information. I can tap on emergency return, and if I want emergency return to runway 30, it's going to say, okay, coming back around, returning to base immediately, my total landing distance is going to be 1,340 feet. So these are some really cool features here. It's giving me all this information readily available. I can tap on summary, and it gives me my all my landing information for that airport and the emergency return. I could print that out, have that ready for the check ride. I think it would be, I would be pretty impressed if you showed that level of command of your EFB in your private pilot check ride. That would be a little above and beyond. If you feel comfortable doing that, and I think it's very attainable, it does cost some money to do that. I think that'd be a good idea for your check ride to show that, hey, I've got all these tools available to me. Here's how I'm using them to be a safer pilot. Okay, so we've got our departure destination select. We're going to double check that our aircraft is the appropriate aircraft selected, and that we have our performance profile selected. And now we're going to take our first look at the nav log. When we open the nav log, we're always going to hit refresh, make sure we're looking at the latest version. And we have a couple options on the nav log. We can do a standard nav log or a basic nav log. So looking at the basic navlog first, it makes writing on it a lot easier, so I can share this to ForeFlight documents. I can use the Apple Pencil to fill out all these different fields, but it doesn't give me fuel information. It doesn't present the fuel information like I want it. So I prefer the standard profile. Looking at the standard profile, up here at the very top, I see my block fuel of 17.4 gallons. My taxi fuel is 1.5 gallons. Remember, we loaded that in our aircraft profile. My flight fuel is 9.4 gallons, and my reserve is 8 gallons. Remember, that's that 60-minute fuel reserve that we wanted to add. I have 0 extra fuel when I land, and I have exactly 8 gallons when I land. So I need 17.4 gallons at takeoff. So ForeFlight at the Performance Plus, it wants you to be efficient, so it's not giving you any extra fuel. Well, putting 17.4 gallons in a 172, first of all, that's kind of difficult, right? Because the fuel gauges aren't that accurate. We got the little dipsticks. I guess we could dip the tanks and see, and then we could try to put in the exact amount that we need. To me, that's a little unsustainable, not real realistic. Most of the time what we're doing is we're topping the tanks off, right? So let's go down here and see. We're going to change this to have 2 people on board, and we're going to go max fuel policy. So we're going to take as much gas as possible, in this case, 38 gallons usable fuel. So now let's go back to our navlog and see what's changed here. Let's hit the refresh. We see our block fuel is 38 gallons, so topped off, 1.5 for taxi, 9.4 for flight fuel, reserve is 8, and we have 20.6 extra gallons and 28.6 gallons of fuel at landing. That's what we're planning on. So obviously this is more fuel than we need, and the way I might tweak this in a check ride is I might say, hey, when you show up to the plane, I arrive in an SUV and 2 guys get out with me, and we're all 3 wanting to ride along. So now you've got 3 people. Let's say each of us weigh 200 pounds. So all 4 of us together, including you, we're all 200 pounds. So now we have 4 people at 200 pounds, and then we each brought 20 pounds of baggage. So we have 80 pounds of baggage. Can we go? Well, as I've been telling you this, I've been plugging it into ForeFlight, and already I got a red error, and I can see that our max landing weight is exceeded by 28 pounds. So our ramp weight is exceeded by 38 pounds. So we cannot do this flight. Even with our min fuel of 18 gallons, we're still overweight. So I might ask you, well, can we do the flight at all, or are we just, out of luck and we're going to have to cancel the whole mission? You could say, well, we got to cancel the mission. There's no way we can do it. But that's not actually accurate. There is a way we could still do this flight. And by using ForeFlight, you could do that relatively quickly. Let's take out, remember we had U-76, which is Mountain Home, as a checkpoint. Well, now let's add that as our destination. That's only 60 miles away. It only takes us 34 minutes. So now we've essentially made a new flight plan to Mountain Home. We'll send that to flights, and we'll load this up the same exact way. We'll load it with 4 200-pound passengers with 80 pounds of gas, and we go to fuel, and we have the errors of our max landing weight exceeded by 28 pounds, ramp weight exceeded by 60 pounds. So even changing our destination to something much closer, we still can't do it. We go to our navlog here, and we can see that our fuel, our block fuel, taxi fuel, flight fuel, everything looks correct, and we're still overweight. So I might press you as the examiner of, well, man, I really need to make this flight. I just want to see if it's possible. So for that, you have to remember, oh yeah, I set my fuel policy of 60 minutes, which isn't the legal limit, right? The legal requirement for fuel policy is actually 30 minutes. So if I have Performance Plus, I can go down here to my reserve fuel, and I can change the policy to 30 minutes of flight fuel there. Okay, so let's change it to 30, and now go back, and I can still see, man, we exceeded our landing weight by 4 pounds and ramp weight by 36 pounds. So again, as the examiner, I'm pressing you, hey, I really need to do this flight. So I can look at, well, we got to take all 4 people. How about the baggage? Could each person take out 10 pounds, let's say. So instead of 80 pounds, we're just going to take 40 pounds of fuel. What does that do? And there we go. Sure enough, now we are legal for the flight. So what I just did there through that exercise is by throwing these challenges at you and forcing you to calculate it, you show me that you understand how to use your EFB in a weight and balance situation for planning for fuel, and that's meeting skill 4, which is recalculate fuel reserves based on a scenario provided by the evaluator. So we just accomplished that, right? So those are just some examples of scenarios I could use with the EFB. Finally, when you're ready to file, you go to proceed to file. I'm going to need to see you do this. What you could do to head it off is if you you prepare a flight plan form, save it to your ForeFlight files. Now when I go to my document section of ForeFlight, I've got a flight plan, an international flight plan form pulled up. I could print this off, put it with my check ride folder, or just present it to the DPE at the beginning of this task. And I'm not even going to ask, hey, you clearly know how to file the flight plan because you already have it prepared and it's in the appropriate format. Hey, that's great. There's no questions there. Okay, so now real quick at the end of this, how do we manage this from a risk management standpoint? ForeFlight this does sound like a ForeFlight commercial. I promise I'm not sponsored here, but ForeFlight makes it really easy. If I go to the checklist of ForeFlight, I can hit the plus button and scroll to the very bottom of templates, and I've got an EFB pre-flight template. So if you're following along on YouTube, I want you to do that and pull up your pre-flight planning checklist is what I name it. And this has a checklist that takes me through risk management for my EFB. So let's look at some of these things. Hey, is my primary iPad charged? Is my secondary iPad charged? Do you have a secondary iPad? If you are like, wait a second, Seth, I don't have a secondary iPad. What you can do is you can take this checklist, you can go to edit, and you can delete secondary iPad because I don't have one, but I do have an iPhone. So I'm going to leave that on there. So I've got a primary iPad, an iPhone. They're both charged. Other portables. Hey, is my Stratus or my Sentry charged? Yep. My backup battery. That might be my risk management, right? Maybe I don't have an iPhone, but I have a backup battery. There may be times where that's not enough risk management. If I'm doing instrument, I'm not just going to rely on a backup battery. If I'm doing a short cross country in VMC conditions, I might go with just an iPad and not have a backup other than a backup battery or charging cables. But I need some way to charge it, right? I need some risk management here. So for the check ride, I would highly recommend you have the iPad and the iPhone combo. I happen to be an iPad and Android user. I'm long-time Android user. So on Android, I have some of the charts. There's other EFB solutions that you can use on Android. I know you can't use ForeFlight. No, they'll never move over to Android for a lot of other reasons we won't get into there. But you need to have some sort of backup. So for me, I have a iPad and then I have an iPad mini. So I actually don't use an iPhone. I use a primary iPad and a backup iPad. Anyway, that's a good risk management tool here. So I can go through all this checklist here. I can go to my data and make sure, hey, my iOS is up to date, my ForeFlight's up to date, all my downloads are done. For moving along, I can go to my weather. Hey, did I do the weather advisories, synopsis, my current weather, winds aloft, all that stuff, flight planning. Hey, did I do my weight and balance? Did I get my route altitudes and estimated time of departure? My FPL, did I send it to flights? Did I enter my fuel planning? Did I view my nav log? Did I complete my briefing? Oh yeah, I didn't do that. So I can go back to flights, tap on briefing, and make sure I open up the briefing, let it load, and go through each of these sections here. So each of these sections, once I complete it, ForeFlight will keep the fact that you completed this briefing on their database for 20 days. So it acts as kind of a backup of proof that you did a briefing. So that's a really good tool. So back to the checklist, final actions. Hey, I want to update weather. I want to check my flight messages. I do that on flights, and your flight messages would appear right here in that text box window. Then my weight and balance is up to date, and then my FPL I want to pack. Oh, okay, so I go back to flights, scroll all the way to the bottom, and I hit pack. and that's going to pack all of my comments, weather, airport NOTAMs, airport AHOS, and the aerial imagery. The AHOS, that's a military thing. Don't worry about that. But it'll pack up all those things so I have access to them even when I don't have a data link. So that's important that you do that. I go back, hey, all batteries, backup iPhone, everything's charged, and then the backup iPad or iPhone is matched. So I've actually logged in to ForeFlight on both devices and they both match, right? And then all batteries and cables are charged. So that's an example of how I can manage risk using a built-in function of my EFB on using an EFB. So that would meet up that R7 requirement of use of an electronic flight bag for a risk management standpoint using that checklist. That basically checks the box off there. So that's a real, I would say real quick, but we spent about an hour going through Task D on how you would plan a cross-country flight plan using an EFB and some of the questions that an examiner may ask you during the check ride and how that would work out. I hope you consider ForeFlight. It's such a good tool. And then I hope you also consider the ACE guide. Check it out. It makes studying for this stuff really a lot easier, I think, because it just puts all the manuals there at your fingertips. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes. It looks like our next episode, we're going to go into national airspace. So we're going to talk all about airspace. So if you got airspace questions, stay tuned for that next episode. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.